Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Paul Rose and this is the first in a series of short presentations that are going to explain the key components for each section of a postgraduate research project. I'm going to go through various hints and tips of what to include in a research project write-up so that you can fully explain your research, its outputs and values to the scientific audience. I'm going to start off by alluding to the idea that a research project is like an egg timer. Please excuse my very bad artwork. If you imagine that the introduction is broad, it explains the key elements of what is being investigated. We then become more specific as we talk about the species or study system that we're interested in, and we outline our aims and objectives and the hypotheses that we will support or refute. We support or refute our hypotheses with data, and these data come from our methods, and the methods are very specific to the project that you have created. We then present our results, which describe what we have found, and we further expand on our discussion and evaluation of these results. So we take them out of the context of our very specific project, and we create a broader picture of their wider meaning. And we finish with a conclusion that explains our key overall finding and why it is important to the wider world. So I will come back to my egg timer diagram as I introduce and explain each stage of research output. This first presentation starts right at the top. We're going to look at the introduction, what it does, what it aims to achieve within your write-up. The introduction has some key aspects. The first of which, it sets the scene. The reader should be able to go over the introduction and understand what you have studied and why you are studying it. It explains the supporting information for your research question, and by explaining the supporting information, I mean that it evaluates and explains the published literature. It explains what information is already out there that you can base your own research question on. It should review previous methods and approaches. It should explain the precedent for why this is an important area of research. And it should tell the reader why the research question is needed. It should explain the reason why there is a gap in knowledge. It should use papers on your study system, or on a related study system, or on a related research question. You might not find papers on the exact type of animal or study system that you are using, but you should be able to find papers that are similar or related to it. So build a wider coverage of the research to explain what you hope to do as you construct your introduction. Remember, it's really important to explain the gap in knowledge so that the reader can see the value and point to the research that you have so painstakingly undertaken. The introduction is the first thing that we should write. It's normally around 20% of your overall word count. So if you are writing a 5,000 word article, for example, your introduction should be around 1,000 words. Give or take, how long is a piece of string? This is just a guideline to follow based on the style and type of your research question. Remember that the length of the introduction also includes the final paragraph that sits before the methods, and this final paragraph includes the aims, objectives and hypotheses. More on aims and objectives in my second research project presentation. The introduction supports your aims. Use your aim to guide you in what sources to evaluate and include in your introduction. So please remember, the introduction starts broad. It explains the bigger picture of what you wish to cover. It then, as we follow my egg timer diagram, becomes more narrow as we start to talk about the specifics of your project. Let's imagine that your project is on milk yield in dairy cows, and whether or not the type of food that is provided to dairy cows influences milk yield. We start really broad by talking about how cows are kept, their husbandry, the different farming systems that they might be under. We then get more narrow and talk about the different breeds of cow and how that impacts on milk yield. And then we get even more narrow and talk about how different breeds of cow process nutrition, forage or pellets differently, and how that impacts on milk yield. And then we get very specific to the type of nutrition that you are interested in and why you wish to study it. So we've looked at the farm overall, we then look at the cow, and then we look at the very specific area of husbandry that we are going to study. You can apply that approach to your own project title. What's the broad aspect of your title, and how do you get more specific to exactly what you aim to investigate? The introduction is covering that first triangle in what we are looking at to go from broad to specific in how we put together what the research project flows and how it flows into the methods. So we explain our key text, we evaluate our examples, and then we come specific to our own study system as we end our introduction by describing our aims, objectives, and hypotheses. There are some key things that the introduction is not. It's not simply a list of interesting information or facts and figures. It does not describe interesting things about the animal that you may be studying. It needs to evaluate and explain research. You need to show synthesis of new concepts, new ideas from the literature. Don't provide a massive review of your species biology and ecology that is not relevant to your question. Think about your research question and think about your project's title. What are the key pieces of background published information that you need to evaluate? If you are talking about the nutrition of captive giraffe, for example, a whole section on how many subspecies of giraffe there are and the different colour patterns on their coats is not going to be useful. An explanation of the types of nutrition they get in captivity and why that needs evaluation is going to be relevant. And the introduction is not a description of what you intend to do. An introduction is the scene-setting evaluation and analysis of the literature that is available that highlights the gaps in our knowledge and where your research will fill those gaps. Reading and reading widely around the subject area is your best way of getting together a really strong, really relevant introduction. So read as much as possible. Make notes on the papers that you read, look at their reference lists and extend the evaluation that they have done. Here's an example of a paper with a really good introduction. It's from 2001 in Animal Welfare, the effect of increasing dietary fibre on feeding, rumination and oral stereotypies, those are abnormal behaviours, in captive giraffes. I've taken a screen grab of the introduction here, but if you find the full text, you'll be able to read it more clearly. The reason why this is such a good introduction is because it starts broad, explaining the problems we see with abnormal repetitive behaviours in captive animals and the problems that we have with animal welfare. It then becomes specific to the giraffe, why the giraffe performs these oral stereotypic behaviours, and why we have a problem with giraffe welfare. It then becomes even more specific by explaining that a way of improving giraffe welfare is to promote rumination, and we can only promote rumination by changing the diet. You can see from the title of this paper that diet is what the authors have focused on. So the broad brush of the introduction is about welfare measures, and the specifics of the introduction are about promoting welfare via better diet for the giraffes they are going to study. And the final paragraph of that introduction explains the aims and the reasons behind the research being conducted in the first place. This is a very brief checklist on what you need to make sure you have included to have a strong and valid introduction. Does it go broad, scene setting, to specific to support your aims? Does it support the research question by having evaluation and analysis of relevant research articles? Is it light on description and heavy on explanation, evaluation, and critique? Does it allow the reader to see why you have done this research project? Does it highlight the gap in knowledge that your question, by being answered, will fill? Have you directed the reader to primary sources of information? And have you evaluated those primary sources of information in the text? By primary sources of information, I mean the actual research paper or conference proceedings, not somebody else's explanation of them. It's always better to evaluate the primary research that has been conducted rather than a review article, for example. So go and find the original piece of work and use that in your introduction. Remember that somebody's second-hand interpretation of a piece of work may differ from what the authors originally found. The primary piece of literature for you to evaluate in your introduction is always best. Does your introduction explain precedent, what has gone before, and relevant approaches that you can build on in your methods? It is not plagiarism to take the reference lists from published work, read those articles, and include those articles in your work. You are still citing those pieces of work. It's just helpful to you that other people have also used them. You can go and find those articles, and then you can evaluate them yourself, so long as you cite them accordingly. And make sure that each and every example you use is explained, evaluated, and critiqued so the reader can understand its relevance to your research. The introduction should flow into the aims, objectives, and hypotheses which you use to support your methods for data collection. And that will be my next presentation, all about writing aims, objectives, and hypotheses that are supported by the literature that you have collected for your introduction. Thank you very much.